Before we begin today, we would like to collectively acknowledge that we gather and work on the traditional lands of the Oceti-Sakowin, Anishinaabe, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the many other nations and groups that predate colonial borders. We hope you enjoy this episode of In Summary, and thank you for listening.
Though this podcast is in conjunction with the Upper Midwest region of the Association of College and University Housing Officers, the thoughts and viewpoints discussed do not represent or reflect those held by the organization as a whole. Please remember that we are all individuals who hold our own beliefs and have been given a platform to express said beliefs. Thank you.
Hey, welcome to UMR podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Dozier, here with your other host, Dallas Lancinese. We have Cole Verbatim with us, and we have a guest today, which is MJ Miller. So our topic for today is performative allyship, and we will also delve a little bit into performative activism. To get started, MJ, can you tell us just a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So my name is MJ Miller. I use they, she pronouns, which are situational because I get that question a lot. I am currently a hall director at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. I've been here for 3 years. I have been in student affairs as a professional for 5 years.
What is performative allyship?
Yeah. So from my perspective and lived experience and research that I've done, because I want to clarify, I am not an end-all be-all expert. But performative allyship is really showing up when it's convenient for causes. So it's a lot of giving lip service to, I support this group, but not backing that up with any action and not listening to the voices from that group. So not actually listening to what they need, but instead doing what you think that group needs, which leads to either like misrepresentation of the movement or simply like stepping away because you're not invested. Performative allyship doesn't always come from a place of malice. A lot of time it comes from a place of ignorance and not really taking the time to listen.
So I guess when it comes to performative allyship, unfortunately, you kind of answered my next question, which was kind of what makes it genuine.
I mean, but I think there's more to it, right? Like performative allyship, like the genuine part of it comes from like, number one, it comes from within of like, why are you taking the actions you are? Like, are you doing it because you want to look good to others? Are you doing it because you want to post on social media that you did this thing that's trendy? Are you doing it because you care about these identities and you care about the folks that are from these identities? I think too, do you care about it because like you're a part of this identity, whether because like you can be like allies to your own community, right? Like we talk about like horizontal oppression in the queer community a lot of like some identities are treated very differently from others within the own community and almost a way that people are trying to push down others to get further up. And so like it could be that you're within this community, but you're only here for parts of the community. So like we talk a lot about like bisexual and non-binary erasure because they exist in those like intersections. And so it's easier to advocate and to support when it's one very clear defined thing, right? Like it's easier for folks to say, I support binary trans people because they do hormone replacement, how it's seen, right? They do like social like transitioning. And so it's easy because you can put it into this box of like, here's what this is. Whereas like that's not true, but it's easier to palate to those who don't have that same verbiage. And so as a result, like you can even have folks within communities that are performative because they're not coming at it from a place of trying to lift up everyone.
Fair. So I guess what like it's more of like when there's a clear cut answer, it's really easy. But when it's broad, then that's kind of when people who are performative in this kind of just dip off.
I would say a lot of times that's what you see, or it's folks who they don't have a genuine interest. They're doing it because they know it's what they're supposed to be doing, right? Like their friends are doing it, or it's something that's like normalized in their like social circles, but they don't have an active like buy-in. And so, like, an example that I always think of is during Black Lives Matter rallies when people were like, we're going to post a black square on
I
Instagram
was
in
thinking the same thing.
solidarity.
Yes, I was thinking the same
And
thing.
what that actually did was disrupt a lot of channels of communication because they were putting in cell blockers in a lot of places where large marches and protests were being held. And so people were doing a lot of communicating via Twitter, via Instagram. And by doing this thing that they thought was helping, they were in fact like actively harming the community and then weren't listening when organizers were telling them, please stop doing this because you're actively harming the movement. But well, all my friends did it and I want to show that I care. But is showing that you care more important than actively supporting them in that moment?
Me and my friends actually had a lot of conversations about that during COVID because like none of my friends put up black squares for their profile pictures, obviously, because I mean, it didn't do anything. It was performative, if anything. And I don't remember what conversation it was eventually that I was talking to one of my friends who had put a black square up, and it was just like, well, what did you do? Like, what are you doing? What are you actually like? Are you going to movements? Are you going to any of the Black Lives Matters? I guess rally is the best word I can think of right now. Are you going to any of the protests? The protest is the word I was looking for. But are you going to any of those, or are you just putting a square up and telling your friends and family, hey, I care about this. Come fight me on social media. I have a keyboard, which
And I
we
think
couldn't
part of
talk on.
it,
Yeah.
and I think part of like the pushback I got when I tried to like have that conversation with like people that I cared about was, well, I'm bringing attention. This was not something that needed more attention, right? Like this was
hmm
frontline news regularly every night. Like people knew these things were happening. There are spaces in which that's appropriate, right? Like we have current geopolitical situations where talking about it is the most important thing because it's not being talked about. And so that's not to say that social media is always performative, but there are cases where if someone is actively telling you, please stop this, you're harming us, and you do it because, well, I just want people to know, that's where it gets performative.
Yeah. And also, like, what else were we talking about at that time? Like, that was the only thing we were talking about.
Animal Crossing.
Oh,
That's the
okay.
other thing that was being talked about.
That's true. Us- me and my friends, because we couldn't go to any of the BLM protests at the time because obviously they were too far. I'm in Kansas, they're in Nebraska. Like those are not places where there is a safe BLM protest. That's just honest. I did go to one that was in town, and even then there were like a lot of trucks with a lot of men in them who were driving by with American flags blaring. Honestly, it's the first time I've ever heard anyone play the national anthem from their truck. Oh, what I was gonna say though was me and my friends, because we couldn't go to any of those, we weren't doing this for anyone else but for ourselves, but we just like set up one of our villages in Animal Crossing for a Black Lives Matter protest because it was just fun. It was a
We
fun
love
thing. It gave us more time to talk about it because we just
Fair,
hadn't given a
yes.
whole lot of time to it. And honestly, it weirdly made me feel really, really heard because I grew up in a very small community, very white community. My mother is white. I didn't have my father in my life. I have a stepfather who's also white. I have no black culture. The only black person in my life, directly in my family, is my brother. And he is 100% someone who does not take that identity in any way, shape, or form, which is perfectly fine. That's his choice. And that's not nobody's problem. We are not culturally black in any way, shape, or form. Uh, from our upbringing. Throughout the life, whatever, there's different things that happen, and there's different experiences that are very specific to where I'm from and how I grew up. And I feel more connected to a lot of parts of Black culture than he does. During that time, none of my family would talk to me about it. They would say, that's not my problem. That's not your problem. I asked my brother about how he felt about it, and he basically said, like, shoot, I don't want this to be on the podcast and hear it, but oh well, it's too late. I'm already here. But he basically said, like, no, I don't feel that. And At the time, it was super frustrating to me, but in retrospect and long term, it wasn't technically my place to make him feel worse about it.
Mhm.
Like, no, it's not how he feels. It's not his identity. It's mine. It's something that I have, even though we grew up the exact same way.
Mhm.
We took it two different ways, and that's okay. But at that time, it was probably the loneliest I had ever felt because there was no one around me who I could just talk to about it, who I knew felt the same way as me, or at least felt similarly. But there was another pro staff member who, his name was Trey. Um, right before we all shut down for COVID, I had made a huge bond to him. And he was probably the first person who, like, I don't know, I felt like was a professional who had the same identity as me. And he took the time to go for a walk with me mid-COVID, and we kept our distance, but he talked through the whole thing with me. And it was that and our little Animal Crossing Black Lives Matter protest. And that just was what I needed. And that I think that for me is why like people who genuinely care, that's why people need it, at least from the stance of like a cultural thing. I obviously we have very different like things that are like affecting us. But that's why I mean the performative versus genuine, like it just makes that big of a difference. I mean, that's why I even went to higher education in the first place because of that interaction. He was a higher education professional who made me feel heard.
I think too, building off of that, like it makes me think of like that year or so later when we were getting the like court rulings
Mhm.
and people were like, well, the justice has been served and like accountability isn't justice. And I felt that like this rage like bubbling in me of like, this is the performative part, right? Like we solved it, problem solved. Like, no, like accountability for taking someone's life is not justice in any way. And
No.
like that, so many people dropped off because they were like, well, I did it. We solved the problem. And like, no, like folks are actively being oppressed, actively being targeted. And like, I think that is a really good, like, full circle moment of seeing like the life cycle of like the trendiness of like a movement.
Yeah.
And so like I just remember literally having to go and like walk it off because people that I was like friends with or close to were like, we did it. And I was like, we did nothing.
No, not at
Nothing,
all.
nothing happened here that should be celebrated other than a slight amount of accountability.
I think the most telling quote I don't even remember who tweeted it, and I'm not sure if I'd ever be able to find it again. But I think when the trials happened and people were celebrating and whatnot, the hardest tweet was, I should have never had to know who George Floyd was. I should have never known his name. That's why this is terrible. This is disgusting, and I don't want anything to do with this, but I should have never known who he was.
I think what hurts really deeply too is like they're not the only person, right? Like I did a lot of
Yep.
Black Lives Matter, like protesting and marching because someone I was close to's cousin was murdered in Charlotte. And so like we immediately went up there. We were being an activist and like no one knows his name, but that was devastating to our community. Like that stopped our world for a long time. And like we get these like one or two names, but like there's so much more of it happening. And I think that's what's hard too, is like those nameless folks that like some of us know because it directly impacted our communities, but no one is seeing those.
Yeah, and I don't know if people really like genuinely cared the way that they say they do on social media, we would know those names. We would know every single one of them. If all the people in your community cared about the Black Lives Matter protests the way they said they did, why on earth were they not absolutely blasting social media with that name and what happened and who did it? Like, if they were really trying to make a change for the people who do not have the attention. The people who already have the attention, that's too easy. It's so easy to just let that go. But no, unfortunately, activism's arguing with your parents who don't understand. And that
Yeah.
sucks.
I
And
think
it activism's ruined Thanksgiving. That's what activism
that's
is.
so true. I think too, you talked about like not being able to go out. And so like having like an Animal Crossing space, like
Yeah.
we talk so much about like I feel like so much of protester like conversations and like activism and allyship is boots on the ground. And like that's not realistic. for like a lot of disabled folks, a lot of folks who are not in safe homes where they can be out about that, right? And so like I've presented in the past on like being a safe protester, and a lot of times being a safe protester is we need those folks who are in their houses who are doing that organizing of like I'm on the phone with people, I'm coordinating with police to get permits, like I'm keeping my people safe, I'm donating my money, like I feel like there's this lens of activism and allyship has to be this one specific thing. And I would love, like, I'm not saying like posting on social media by itself is not it. And I think we've all really established that. But posting when it's not being talked about, giving financially if you're able. If you're not able, like, how can you connect to local movements that already exist to provide support, to provide, like, be the person at the jail getting names as people are walking in, right? Like we need documentation. We need those like organizers and that support so that just because you're someone who I don't feel safe going to this thing, that is perfectly great. And like I want you to set boundaries for yourself, but there's still more you can do. That's never the end of the story.
And maybe so because like I like to be a very like positive, try to look at like the silver linings kind of thing of any situation, and that's not always the best thing, but like I know it helps me get through stuff. Something that I actually throughout when all this was happening that I really appreciate's a weird way to say it, but I'm going to use the word appreciated. Was like so I grew up in a family and an area that was I didn't know until I got to like college was like really racist. I just thought it was like normal. And so I got to college and I was like, "Oh my God, I didn't realize I'm saying things I shouldn't." So I had all these like people on social media that I was still like connected with in some capacity. And then these like things are happening, like George Floyd protests, all this stuff was happening. And then these people are posting for like the other side, let's just say, of like supporting the wrong, part of history, basically. And I was like, well, now I know who to not associate myself with, which I really appreciated, because it helped me, like, because I've been trying to grow into a better person each and every day, and it's hard to do that when you're being chained down by those that aren't supporting growth. That mindset of just trying to be more positive, be better as a person, and so like and it was just so hard during those times too personally because like one of those like individuals I just kept seeing posting on social media was my mom about like things that she shouldn't be, and I would always just comment and I would call her and be like, you're on the wrong side of history, right? Like you're saying the wrong things here. And we had some really like long, deep, hard, tough conversations, and I mean she's gotten a little better at this point, but yeah, that's like the one big thing through all of this that I just really appreciated was like how like I guess divisive it really was to really show people's like true colors. Because like before, like people could like hide behind a screen, hide behind like just like they could perform. And This really, especially because it was like around COVID time and people had not like they were like, what else am I gonna do other than show who I really am on the internet? And so they showed who they really were.
I also have not really had a huge opportunity to talk about a lot of these things for years, honestly. Um, I'm still in a very deeply white community, which is fine. Like, it doesn't bother me. That's not the problem. Because the people I've talked to about these topics, like that's what I talked about for almost a full year. Like, it constantly like haunted me and like just picked away at me. And I don't know. I stopped talking about it. Because it just all it did was like destroy my mental health. It made me not want to talk to people, go outside, anything like that. So I just kind of looping back around on the emotions on it. So I'll get back around, I promise. But uh thank you all for talking about this because it's just I don't know, like talking about it is the real like that's the real conversations. Those are the real solutions. That's the real activism. It's not just waiting until it's over with and then everyone moves on. Like it doesn't matter how many years go by where the whole George Floyd situation happened, like that will always like scare me. I won't ever move to a city because I'm way too afraid of that kind of thing happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I was an undergrad, even I had an advisor who was always looking out for me, and there was an assault on campus, and I was a music student, and we have to go there, like we have to go to the music building to practice at night because we have to practice. That's our job. Like that's what we have to do. That's going to be our livelihood. And we can't do it during the day because we have too many classes. And my advisor just said, don't come to practice at the music building after like 9 o'clock. I don't want you to be in that situation. And I don't want you to ever put yourself in a place where you may be accused for something that has nothing to do with you. Because I'm a large black man. I am larger than many people. If I was an absolute garbage human, yeah, I'm big. I understand that. But it's one of those like it always scares me to ever put myself in a similar situation. So I just and that's the thing, like when people I'm an angry person. I am very passionate and angry, and I won't yell at people because I know what my size is and I know what that does to people, and I will never yell at someone, not in the workplace. I won't yell at someone in my personal life. I won't yell at someone when I'm playing Magic the Gathering. Like I can't. That's just I know my space. I know how much space I take physically and non-physically. But thank you all. I just lots of thinking about stuff that I kind of put in the back of my head for a little too long. But
Yeah,
we can
something I
also go to
just
a next. Huh?
before we move forward,
Yeah.
and I don't this regardless, your anger has value and you're allowed to feel it. And I
Oh,
hope
yeah.
you know that. And like I
Yeah.
know it's hard when like I before I was a housing human, my experiences were specifically with historically Black fraternities and sororities, and before that, working for a scholarship program specifically for men of color wanting to work in elementary and middle education.
Mhm.
And so that conversation of like, I constantly have to be aware of how I exist in spaces that those of other identities don't, I think is something we don't talk about enough. And it's not a conversation for today, right? Like that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But like for those who don't come from identities where your identities are visible, like being very cognizant of some folks have to consider how they show up every minute of every day and how can you lessen that impact, I think is something that like if I could get a takeaway for folks outside of like how does your activism and allyship show up and where does it come from, is how can you help folks whose identities are visible not have to think about the ways they exist every second of every day, at least when they're with you.
Absolutely. And like we see it all the time too. We see we have I mean obviously we won't name drop anyone, but we have a grad assistant who is from a Hispanic background, and because of that, he won't go to anyone for help for anything because that is very culturally based where just men have to be strong. They don't ask for help, and that's it. We've asked him multiple times, would you tell us if you needed help with something, or would you tell us if you were hurting or struggling on something? He said, absolutely not. That's not how it works. And that it's sad, it's frustrating, but also I we set boundaries at least, and we respect the boundary of I know that you won't go to us for help, but if we see that you need help with something, we will like we will help regardless. But we just won't force you to be the one to ask for help. And that's just where we had to meet him in the middle because obviously our cultures are so different to the point where I will ask for help and he definitely wouldn't. So what could we possibly do besides just help when we know he needs it?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I really do think that a lot of people decide that the best way to go about any identity that is visible is to ignore the fact that it's there. Because, oh, well, if we treat everyone the same, then we're all good. But what's the same to you? Like, does that mean you're treating everyone like they're white people? Does that mean like
I was gonna say equality isn't equity.
exactly
When
like
someone is systemically disadvantaged because of their identities, they don't need the same thing. They need additional resources and support. And that's what we as higher ed professionals exist to do is connect them to those resources so that everyone can get to the same level.
absolutely. I mean, you just hit it on that. That's so hard. I can't add anything to it. Equity is so important, and people are like, "Oh, yep, equal rights for everyone." Nope. I want equitable rights for everyone. I want everyone to get resources they need, not resources everyone else has. I did want to highlight a topic that I didn't quite bring up in my questions before, mostly because as we were doing questions, this subject came up. Did you guys hear about the student in a high school in Oklahoma?
No,
Um,
I don't know what
so
you're
there was
talking
a
about.
trans student who basically the school changed their bathroom policies essentially, or they said something about it, which eventually ended up, I'm so sorry, MJ, if I am blindsiding you with this.
No, you keep
But
cooking.
okay. Um, but there was a student who got into an altercation with other students. Actually, no, the student was assaulted in a bathroom. It wasn't an altercation, it was an assault on that student, a trans student, identified, I believe, as non-binary, and got into basically, yeah, students bullied student, attacked the student, and the student did not get medical aid and passed away. Um, in it was a high school student, and we've had some conversations about this in my office here and there. Um, but I know that this is unfortunately super relevant to what we're talking about, and unfortunately, it's in the timeline that we're talking about. I just wanted to highlight it and just talk about like that part of this. I wasn't sure if they actually released the name of the student based on the fact that they were they're obviously not of age because a student. Their name is Next Benedict.
They were 16.
Yeah, they were 16. So I don't even know exactly where this falls into our conversation because it kind of falls into this is publicized and people know about it, but it's not so publicized, for example, that my parents knew about it because we talked about it a little bit and they had no, like, it didn't come up on their radar.
Yeah, I did not. I don't think I would have ever known about this unless it was brought up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what's so hard, right? And
Mhm.
I'm probably going to sound emotional because I spend so much of my time in spaces where we're talking about these things. And like,
Mhm.
I am connected to a lot of queer news sources as a queer individual. And so, like, I think what's hard is like you said this, and I thought it was a different situation involving a trans student in
Mhm.
Oklahoma because that's what my life is so often.
Yeah.
And so, like, as a non-binary person who, like, for a lot of my students, like, I'm the first non-binary adult they meet. These are the conversations that I'm having of like, they're scared. They're scared because they've never planned for being able to be an adult because these levels of violence are so prevalent and they're not given safe spaces to do regular bodily functions. So I'm originally from South Carolina. I went to undergrad on the North Carolina-South Carolina border. I lived there when the bathroom bill, the first one in the country that happened in Charlotte, took place. And so we did a lot of activism then, and a lot of it was we just went and we used the bathroom in Charlotte in bathrooms that didn't go with our sex assigned at birth, right? Because I had a lot of non binary and trans friends, and we were like, this isn't okay. And it's so frustrating because it got a lot of news coverage that it was happening. And in the process of getting news coverage and not also showing the pushback to it, more and more legislators across the country saw that and said, I want to do that because that gets people elected for people who share beliefs like me. And I think that's what's so hard is like news outlets have a responsibility to report the news. And I'm not discounting that. But the things they choose to report on at a national level can be so performative and so detrimental to communities. Because had they also covered the level of protest, because these protests didn't just come from left-leaning individuals, right? Like, but the thing that made national news was the bill existed. And then we saw it sweep the nation. And it was so disheartening to see this thing that this one terrible person did now impact people across the country. And like, I went from South Carolina to Missouri, and now I'm in Wisconsin. And watching my students' rights, my loved ones' rights continually erode away because non-binary isn't easy, right? Because people will be like, well, which bathroom were they supposed to use? It doesn't matter. They were attacked in a bathroom. Like, it's it goes back to that, like, it's hard to support folks who live in the margins. And it's so frustrating that this continues to happen, and only every once in a while does it make news where other folks see it who aren't in the community, who don't actively have a deep lens. And I don't fully know where I'm going with this. I'm just angry about it a lot of the time, because what I do is like I experience those feelings, right? And like I have to process my feelings at a rapid rate, because then I have to support students who are in crisis about it. And like it's very rare that someone comes in and checks up on the helpers, right? Like that's what we do in our job, right? Is like we're the people they come to when they need the support.
Yep.
And very rarely are we doing the check-ins with each other and we're supporting each other and we're going, hey, that's your identity. Like, how can I help you? Like, and like not taking things, right? Like, if I'm on duty, like, don't just tell me I'm losing the phone, right? Like, talk to me about what I need. But like being so cognizant that like, that doesn't just impact that community, that impacts everyone who exists in that identity who now has a new fear. And like, it's a lot harder when we look at organizing for the queer community, because it is so vast and there's so many different identities, and not everyone within the community supports everyone within the community. And so like a lot of times you get this devastating news and go, what do I do with it? Like you gave me this thing that's heavy and I know it's not okay, but what do I do? And I think that goes to that genuine versus performative, where like a performative ally posts about it and goes on about their day, right? Like I raised awareness, I'm done. Whereas like those folks who come from a genuine place of care, either because they're part of the community or their loved ones are, that's not enough. But so often it's hard to know what's next.
Performative activism is trying to change the world, but genuine activism is just changing like things in people's lives, individual people's. Like it's people who want to change the world. It's super ambitious. It's super, I admire it. I admire it so much. And I know people want to change the world. I totally get that. And I want to too. But it's not possible. It's not feasible. Elon Musk can't change the world. Jeff Bezos can't change the world. They can change little things, but they can't fix hunger. Like, and people are like, oh, if I had all that money, I'd just solve hunger. You can't solve hunger. That's not how it works. It's not a money issue. That's never the problem. It's a problem with a lot of other things. But what does your US dollar do in all of Africa? Like, that's nothing. We're talking about tangible, real things, and we're talking about systems. We're not talking about the actual supplies. Yes, the supplies are helpful, but that's temporary. We need long-lasting solutions. And if you're going to try to give a blanket solution like, oh, I'm gonna drop a care package of 1 million sandwiches into Africa, that is only going to destroy their ecosystem. It's not gonna solve it. It's only gonna hurt it long term for a short term gain, and so you can look good on your Instagram or TikTok, I guess.
So you perform, and so you look good on social media.
It is
Yeah.
100%. So you can, I mean, that's why it's called performative allyship, performative activism. Like all of it's just so you can look good and people say you're a good person, but be a good person. Actually, just go and be a good person. Don't do it for you. Don't do it for anyone besides the people you're doing it for. And if any of it benefits you, then it's not for them, it's for you.
Okay, my last takeaway is, so
Yep.
I got a political science degree because I wanted to change the world. And I went into higher ed because I realized I had to do that one student at a time, because they're the ones who go and build the world. And so if I could give everyone homework from listening to this podcast, it's understanding what incrementalism is, because I think that's truly the way that we save the world. It's the way we save our profession. It's the way we save people, because incrementalism is doing things literally one step at a time, even when we want to jump to the end. And so like really truly understanding that like the impact you have on each student, they're going to go and they're going to have that impact in their field that they choose to go into. And so by helping each individual student, you are in a sense saving the world literally one person at a time, one interaction at a time. And so I think that would be the thing that I'd want folks to take away as we kind of wrap up, is saving the world isn't this big heroic thing. It's doing little things every single day.
Cole, read stories.
Yeah, Cole, you want to read us the story?
Yeah, so this one came in through, I believe, one of our Instagram stories when we posted about it. Like, give us some stories that you have about working in housing and residence life. And so one person submitted that a student came running down to their office screaming to call 911. While they were panicked, thinking there was a threat or danger, the student went on to explain that they took home leftovers from Friendsgiving, including a pan of brownies. The student thought they were regular brownies and decided to eat a half of the pan. Turns out they were actually pot brownies, and the student was so high they were starting to hallucinate.
All right. I think my first thought initially when I saw that was how good were they? Because if you're like if you're hallucinating, just being like what, that's crazy. That's like, what are you seeing? I would love to know. I would love to have a conversation. What are you looking at? What are you seeing? Hallucinations from just pop brownies? I don't know.
Listen, I worked in San Francisco once and I had a student come to me and they were like, I'm pretty sure I'm having a heart attack. And I said, okay, what happened? And they go, I had 6 gummies and I can feel my heart in my fingertips. And I said, okay, let's take
Uh,
this one step.
when you said how good were they? I was talking. I thought you were talking about like what was the flavor quality of the brownies? Like
No,
what?
no.
Like how did you eat a half? Because I can't eat a half pan of brownies normally, no matter
Yeah,
what.
yeah.
So they'd have to be some bomb brownies for me to eat half a pan.
You guys ever get like a text or a message from like student staff saying, "Oh, we need to talk," and then they schedule a meeting with y'all, and then so your brain goes to the worst, like, "Oh my God, something's happening. They're resigning. I don't know what's going on. I'm sad. I'm scared." And so I get this, I get a message the other day from one of my fantastic staff members, and they're like, "Yeah, we got to talk," and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I can set aside some time." I canceled staff meeting this week, so I was just like, let's just talk during that time because I already had it technically in my brain schedule anyway. And so they come in my office, um, on like the verge of tears. Okay, this is gonna turn into funny. I swear, we'll get there. But they're like on the verge of tears and they're explaining things to me. And then the bulk of the meat of the story is they're like, "Oh, I just don't feel like I'm pulling my weight on the team, and I really want to. Like I feel like I'm falling behind." And I'm like, "Okay, give me like an actual example where you feel like you're not pulling your weight." And they're like, I I I got my posters up for our hall event late, and I said, "What else?" And they're like, "Nope, that's it."
Absolute noodle.
And I said, "You are fine." You're and like again, these words are coming out with like tears on like their face, and I'm like, "You are so wonderful. I if that's like how you feel like you're not pulling your weight, thank you so much for being on my team." I literally had to be like, don't you remember your eval that we talked about like 2 months ago? It was fantastic. There was nothing wrong about like what you were doing. It was all positive. Um, and so like, and then eventually we just started talking about cats in the meeting. But I was just like, that's just so funny because like it goes back to that like we always have our own personal expectations and standards of how like work performance should happen, and when like either the department doesn't match it or like others don't match it on your team, it can be hard to struggle or hard to like balance sometimes. It's a struggle, and I've been feeling that a lot lately. And so they come in my office, my student comes in my office about this, and I'm just like, you are fine, you are hitting everything you're supposed to, you're doing way more than you feel like you you are. And so I'm rambling, but I just
No,
thought that was interesting.
so the funny, I've had similar stories, and I won't go into any of them just because there's some recent ones that I'll hold off on, and I'll say off the record eventually. Um, but I have had students come up to me and talk about how they don't feel like they're contributing, and uh, I find that interesting when they're super like on top of it and they're doing all the right things because when I was an RA, I turned in 0 duty logs. I never turned in a single duty log. Right now, my supervisor, right now, is my same supervisor when I was an RA.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I'm an assistant director. He's a director now, but he was a community director and I was an RA. And I from the get-go, I just said, hey, I just want you to know, I'm not going to turn in a single duty log. And I was upfront, and he said, yeah, we're going to change that. And I said, good luck. And I never turned in.
If
I
you
did
set the
everything
bar
else.
low, set the bar
Yeah.
low. So if you exceed it, you look great.
And I didn't exceed it. I did exactly what I was supposed to do, which is nothing. Um, but all of my rounds partners would always turn the duty log because they didn't want to get in trouble. And I was never told that until way later. And it's like, oh, I'm actually not contributing. I'm still not going to do it because I'm selfish, but but I should, and I know I should.
Yeah, well, you
For any
acknowledged it.
students, for any student staff listening to this, please submit your duty logs.
Submit your
It is
duty
very
logs.
important.
For us, it was less important because any situation that was important enough to be in a duty log would be an incident report no matter what.
Okay.
We write an incident report for every single thing. So there was no time in a duty log where I wouldn't have written an incident report for the same thing, and I still know that I was supposed to be a duty log. And I
That
know I
sounds
was
like
supposed to.
copium to me.
It's totally copium, absolutely.
And so, in summary, don't just say it, do it. And thank you for joining us on this edition of In Summary, the UMR podcast. We'll catch you on the next one. Have a great month.
Bye now. Y'all have fun now, you hear? Come on back.